Hey everybody, welcome to this week's KPIs podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Folk, and I am excited to sit down with Sean Stauth this week, who is Qlik's Global Director of AI and Machine Learning. We're going to talk about all that Qlik stuff, but we're going to talk about kind of his career path, how he got to where he is. He was in Silicon Valley for a while and actually around when the iPhone released, which is its own interesting story. But we're going to talk about all those things and kind of his career path and advice he has to young professionals starting out. Listen, I want to also warn you that we had some issues with audio on my end. I take the blame, not Sean. So if the audio sounds a little bit different or diminished, I apologize. Nothing I could do to go back and fix the amazing conversation, nor did I want to. Enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, I am joined today by Sean Stauth, who's the Global Director of AI and Machine Learning for Qlik. Sean, thanks so much for being here.
Kurt, it's awesome. It's so cool to be here with you. Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to it. AI is everything now, isn't it? It's so funny because there's been all these evolutions in the industry over the years, and I guess sort of right place, right time for both career and for Qlik. So it's super interesting.
Exactly. So looking at your background a little bit on LinkedIn, like I saw what you studied. It was very specific. So one of my questions was, how did you get into tech? But given what you studied, did you always know that you wanted to be in that tech space?
Oh, well, in AI and data analytics, no clue. I mean, that's like one of the evolutions with a career. I started my career as an engineer with Accenture's Research and Development Group. And that focus was basically on commercializing technologies, any technology, any sort of buzzword. Did some big data, did some data analytics. That's kind of what got me my start there. What was so fun about that journey is that that was based in Palo Alto, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so we're able to see all the new technologies and the startups kind of coming up. And then also getting the startup bug myself, had the opportunity to go to some startups. The whole first cloud revolution, worked with a company called Joyent, which was one of the first cloud companies. They launched Twitter. And then also had the opportunity to help found a company called Silicon Valley Data Science, which was on the cusp of the whole data science revolution. This is right when the term data science was even being named, and businesses were recognizing how important this will be. That got acquired by Apple, and then I spent some time over there and learned how to industrialize these types of capabilities. So it's been a really fun journey, and sometimes you can anticipate what's in front of you, but sometimes you go along for the ride.
Right, and that and looking at your history, you were in Palo Alto in the years when this little thing called the iPhone was released,
Uh-huh.
like that no one knew what that would become and how that would kind of totally revolutionize the industry around tech. So that's what was that like, being in there and seeing this little thing announced that I don't think anybody knew the ramifications, but you were in that tech space, so maybe you did know. What was that like?
You do and you do and you don't. I think the iPhone is really interesting because it's another example of a technology that is highly disruptive. And so at the time, I was actually with Accenture Technology Labs and working in their mobility group. And so we had to understand, should we build mobile applications? We called them mobile widgets. They're now all called apps. But the first like SAP app for the iPhone. But it was interesting because at that time, everyone was using BlackBerry. And so there were so many organizations that essentially were saying, BlackBerry is never going away. Apple is not enterprise ready. Because Apple's not enterprise ready, it is never going to gain any market share. And we've all seen how that panned out.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably people that are going to listen to this and watch this and be like, "What the heck's BlackBerry?"
I know.
Right? It's shocking to think about the grip that had, that everybody had one of those and it just disappeared and it doesn't exist anymore. There's a couple things I want to talk about. So when you think about your younger self in that tech space, everything that was going on in Palo Alto is a interesting area and highly competitive and all that stuff. What's some of the best advice you would give to your younger self in your career to kind of how to establish yourself and become known at a company?
I think there's a couple different ways, and one is really define an area of expertise. I think some of the best advice that I was ever given early in my career by a senior leader was essentially you need to be known for an expertise in a particular area and then branch out. And once you have that expertise, that kind of becomes your bedrock that you can always fall back on. And so then you can, try new avenues and you have to try different paths, but you have to start building expertise in one particular area. And for me, oddly enough, that became data analytics and AI. And so, in my career path, I've done work in cloud computing and runtime, as I mentioned, work in mobility. I've done work in the healthcare space and in smart grid, but it always comes back to this foundational expertise in data and not AI. And so I do think that people that are starting their career and are looking to, build up or go up in an organization, it's really important to roll up your sleeves and learn something in and out as much as you can.
Yeah, that's really good advice because there's so much being thrown at us, even at the company where we both work. Like we have all these different facets and sides and products that you can get overwhelming, but kind of figuring out what's of interest, digging into that a little bit more and becoming an expert in that field, or at least wanting to go after that really can kind of hone in on what you can do. And you get to learn more, you know how to ask questions better. And that rolls into all those other things. That's great advice. You are someone who hires people, and we know tech's in a bit of a squeeze. There's layoffs happening. There's people coming up, graduating, looking for jobs. Like, what are some of the key things you look for when you hire someone?
I think I've always kind of had this framework, attitude and aptitude, and I kind of want to focus on attitude because even I've done some hiring around the globe over the last couple of years, and you will put out what we expect of the role and our aspirations for it, and then we talk to individuals, and people have different aspirations, they have different skill sets that they bring to the job, and so for me, the biggest single thing I look for is frankly their attitude. Are they willing to adapt? Are they willing to step up? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to admit what they don't know? Because I think those are the people that are going to succeed over the long term. And again, make that jump into a new role that, of course, they've oftentimes never done before.
Agreed. That's great because it's hard. Now, I'll ask it this way. The world has changed from how people used to do interviews, and I know that you're kind of located away from a bunch of different areas, but how do you think it's best to kind of get attitude across? When you're submitting a resume, that's hard to inject attitude into it. That's sometimes hard to inject attitude into a screen like we're doing right now.
I think it's about being confident and being yourself, and knowing what you're really looking for and knowing what you're not looking for. If you have a sense of self and you have a sense of what you're really passionate about doing, I think that that can go a long way. If you're trying to go through the motions, it's very easy to see that, just running through the questions, you're not passionate about a job, you haven't done any homework, you haven't reached out to individuals. And I think that when I am interviewing people, it's hard. And listen, I think we've all been part of the interview process. I was back in early in my career when we were doing brain twisters and essentially putting interviewees on the spot, making them feel horribly uncomfortable. And Google did a study on this, and they learned that there was no correlation between people that did well at brain twisters and those who were successful in their jobs. But what they did find is that it made the interviewers feel smarter about themselves because they were giving a really hard brain teaser. So I've done those interviews before. I think that, for any advice for people that are in the job market, it's around identifying the areas that you'd be passionate about. What are the main cultural aspects of a company that you really think are important? And again, sometimes that can be about working with in a particular field, that can be working in a role, or that can be working with a particular type of team. And then just be confident and be yourself and give your best shot. The other thing I will say, it's very hard. The whole interviewing process is very hard. And so it's almost like dating. Sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't go well. And if it doesn't go well, you know what? You just move on. You just move on, but you got to keep your head up.
So shifting into some of your travels, your title about the global role, you have been all over the place in the last couple of years talking about AI and ML. What are some of the common themes that you're seeing as you talk to customers and you're hearing as you're out, in person with people?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting evolution over the last, let's call it even starting back to my Silicon Valley data science days when I was able to hear from a lot of companies around the world then as well about their strategic aspirations with data. And technology has changed significantly over that period of time. When I started out, we were talking about large data platforms and distributed computing using technologies like Hadoop and the NoSQL revolution, the beginning of using Python approaches to build machine learning models and predictive analytics, supervised and unsupervised learning. Fast forward, we have enormous compute power. We've got enormous enormous power of these cloud services and the generative AI with the large language models that has completely changed the game. What is striking to me in the conversations I have with customers, though, is the fundamental nature of business and business strategy has not changed. So manufacturers are still running a manufacturing business, and they still need to worry about supply chain. They need to worry about operations. They need to worry about the yield off of their plants or off their assembly lines. Healthcare companies still need to worry about patient outcomes. Retail space, it's all about margin. When I started off in my career talking to the first retailers, they were concerned about margin and customer outreach, customer engagement, lifetime value. They're still talking about that today. And so what really the interesting part of my job is, how can we map this new opportunity, this new innovative space with AI to their business strategy? And I think that's the most fulfilling and funnest part of my job.
Yeah. That's fascinating to hear that as you think about that. That the what they're still trying to do is the same, but we have all these new tools that can lead to more exciting things, or getting the answers that they need faster. But it's not necessarily a strategy change in an overall strategy. It's how you're going to use these things to help build your strategy and to be more competitive.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the things that we often talk to our customers about. There's this idea now of an AI strategy, and I think it's important, but in some ways it misses the point a little bit. It's about getting your business strategy enabled by AI. So how can these new technologies really unlock new opportunities in your existing business strategy? And what that does is that focuses on the business strategy itself, your traditional go-to-market, and not about the shiny new objects and technology that come out and change every single year, every single month. There's been so many different updates and releases with these large language models over the last year. And if you're just focused on that, as opposed to continuing to keep your head down on your business strategy, then it's really a distraction and you're losing an opportunity to compete in your market.
So what's advice to companies, because we've seen it, right? And I've talked about it. I've talked about it with Drew Clark. I've talked about it with Brendan Grady, that you have higher ups in C-level saying we need to be using AI, not always fully aware what that means necessarily or how to implement that. But as you're in that space, what is your advice to somebody who's been tasked to bring in AI, but also to not lose focus on that?
I think it's two things really. The first is around having that business strategy, as we mentioned. But the second is actually, this comes from a little bit of what I've learned in Silicon Valley around testing and measuring results. And so if we think about building a machine learning model, for example, the goal in that is not to build a model. It's not to start interacting with generative AI. It's about how can you make a meaningful impact to a strategic KPI in a way that you can measure that. And so my advice is, let's start with some low-hanging fruit and look at some strategic KPIs where we believe there is the potential to be impact with AI against those strategic KPIs. Let's do some proof of concepts and let's measure the result against those KPIs. And there's a lot there. There's a lot in terms of what I just sort of spoke to. But the key thing is, it doesn't end with the technology in a lab somewhere. It really is measured by the overall impact on that strategic KPI.
Qlik acquired Big Squid, which is the company that you came from, and that was to take a hold of Big Squid and the amazing tool Kraken that was a auto machine learning tool. Now, part of this was, as we talk about the four pillars of analytics, right? We have the descriptive, which is what happened. We have the diagnostic, which is why did it happen? Then we get into this predictive and what will happen. Then finally, now that we know those things, prescriptive. So what should we do? Now, I would say from being here before you guys got acquired, like Qlik had been playing solidly in those first two. And even from kind of a rear looking approach, talked and spoke to well, yes, know these things, take action on it. Because if you just do the first two and then you do nothing, it's not helpful to anybody.
Not
So
helpful.
not at all. So we acquired Big Squid to help with the Qlik AutoMail to really tackle that third pillar. But can you talk about why this third pillar is so important, but why many companies still seem to struggle with implementing it?
Yeah, so in terms of why it's important, it's frankly the power of machine learning that allows you to predict things in the future based on historical data. And so the what we have a framework at Qlik that's really predict, explain, and act. Because what machine learning does in essence is based on historical events, you can predict something about your business in the future, predict which customers are likely to buy your product, predict which manufacturing lines are likely to have problems with their yield, and then tell you why. And the why is the most important part because the why is a lot what allows you to act on that. And so this type of framework is been established as incredibly valuable for companies. And over the last 10 years at least, it has gone from a speculative technology to a must-have table stakes to be able to compete in the market. So the customers that I talk to, whether they're in the financial services, insurance, retail, healthcare, manufacturing, across the spectrum, they're in very competitive markets with their own pressures. And being able to use something like predictive AI to help gain efficiencies around their strategic KPIs, as I've mentioned before, is what allows them to sustain margin and create new market opportunities. And so there's a really big understanding about the need for this. And I think that this, when I'm talking to a lot of customers, it's really understood the need is well established, but the how is the hard part. And I want to take a couple steps back to talk about the how, based on my experience starting in Silicon Valley, where a lot of the data scientists are using models based on Python to build these predictive capabilities. And that sort of art, that sort of capability is very hard for most organizations to be able to do themselves. They don't necessarily have access to the talent, or it just takes too long. And so what Big Squid built and why I joined Big Squid and was so impressed with their platform is a way to take essentially automate that entire process to make it faster, more repeatable, and more scalable within a business. And so now at Qlik, it's even expanded beyond that because as part of the overall cloud platform, there is now an end-to-end machine learning studio where you can go from identifying your data assets, doing the data engineering, data prep, predictive modeling, experimentation, model metric evaluation, looking at the explainability metrics like the Shapley values, deploying that into an application or into a workflow, implementing that, and then measuring the results of the outcome. And so for me, there's so much opportunity for this end-to-end vision that Qlik has.
Yeah, and then I would say also too, like we're measuring those results, but then as you measure them, taking advantage of some of the other things that we've done through acquisitions, which is automating responses to them. We're kicking off alerts that force you to take action. Not just, okay, now I know, and that's great, but there's actually things you can kick off so that things happen in place. And I know Jason Bishop, who we work with, has shared some of those things about this validates this type of lead that then automates this being created in the CRM tool as a lead that someone needs to follow up because it's hit all these measures. Like it's not waiting for someone to take action. It's taking the action, forcing then that salesperson to do something with the data and the ML that's happened to it and predictability to say, this is a great lead, now go reach out to them. And that's really cool.
Yeah, let me give an example about this to kind of bring it to life because you're absolutely right. You actually have to take action. We were working with a manufacturing customer who was having problems with one particular assembly line, incredibly complicated assembly line. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of sensor points around lots of different measurements. And what they wanted to understand is, can we use machine learning to be able to predict when we're going to have a yield problem off of that assembly line? And they're able to measure what the product defect would look like. And so we put this into a machine learning model that was able to predict in the future. In our case, that prediction, that time window was 15 minutes. So let's assume everything right now looks perfect and your engineer sitting on the assembly line. Everything is good. All systems are green. And we're able to use machine learning to predict, wait a minute, 15 minutes from now, you're going to have a problem. even though everything is perfect right now. And the reason why you're going to have a problem is X, Y, and Z. And for them, it had to do with certain oil temperature and pressure sensitivity measurements. And in order to take this to life, what we do, as you described, is this cannot be a model that sits in a lab somewhere. This has to be a model where that prediction sets off an alert that sends it to the human that then can interpret that and take action to ensure that there's not ultimately a problem on that assembly line. And so this is where it becomes very powerful, that end-to-end view with the alerting and the automation.
Yeah, so having worked with you and the AutoML team, getting AutoML into several customers, I think what I kept noticing, and we've had discussions with this and other on the team, we saw similar challenges in each. And the challenge that we always come up against, first of all, is, I would say, getting that data ready, right? There's this, I'm just going to shove data in here and hope for the best. That doesn't really work, because it goes to the old adage, bad data in, you're going to just get bad results out, and we don't want that. So what were some of the potholes that we kept seeing for customers? And I know that we've just released some new information to kind of tackle some of that. Can you share about that?
Oh yeah, it's continues to be the hardest part of the whole problem, let me tell you. And I frankly don't think it's going to go away, because there's two aspects of it. There's the technical aspect, that you being able to integrate with multiple different data sources and do the data engineering, the feature engineering to get an ML ready data set. The good news there is that Qlik is in the process of really releasing some amazing new capabilities that streamlines that, makes it way easier. And I'm so excited for that. But there's also the business aspect, and this is not going to go away. And what do I mean by this? It's knowing something about your business. And so if you're in insurance and you're trying to understand or make a prediction about claims complexity, you have to understand, where could that signal potentially come from? What do these features actually mean to the business? So that you can put together the right data pipelines that are meaningful for machine learning. And so the good news is, Qlik, we are releasing some amazing new data pipeline and data engineering capabilities. I'm so excited about this, because this is the hardest part of the problem. Let's not sugarcoat it. But at the same time, this is where a whole bunch of new leaders and organizations, I think, are going to step up. Data engineers, data scientists, and business analysts that can then understand how to translate these machine learning hypotheses and goals to a working data pipeline that can be used in machine learning.
Yeah, so I know one of the things that we just talked about in a blog that we've kind of released was more about this intelligent model optimization and the benefits that bring. Can you share a little bit more about what that means, kind of on a layman's level?
Yeah, this is so exciting. So let me even speak to about what AutoML does. So back in my early days, working with data scientists, you'd have a hypothesis about a particular problem, and you have different model mathematical approaches you can use. These are algorithms. You have different kinds of algorithms you could use. One of the data scientists that we work with always chose logistic regression. He just loved it. He thought, you know what, this is the best model for the most types of problems that we solve. But of course, there are a lot of different algorithm types, and some of these algorithms are old, like 100 years old. Some are newer, like the gradient boosted algorithms. And what Qlik does with our AutoML capability is we say, you know what, we actually don't understand which algorithm is going to be the most have the best fit for this particular data set and represent the signal the most. Some are linear, some are nonlinear, some are tree-based. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take. And so we just run them all and we score them. But what we're doing with this new model optimization capability is there are other things that you have to look out for within when you're designing these models. The first is the class balancing. How balanced is a particular class? Are there feature leakages, which means are some variables highly correlated with each other? Are you oversampling on certain aspects of one particular feature or not? What do the hyperparameters of the model actually look like? And so what we're doing now within the platform is we're just running that against a whole bunch, we're applying a whole bunch more compute against this to essentially take care of that whole process for you. So we can eliminate leaky features, we can rebalance classes, and we can essentially optimize for the specific model that is best for the problem at hand.
Now I'm going to throw my little sales line in here, because we do both work for this same company. And you have it behind you and I have it on my shirt. Compute, right? This AI thing, and you said it earlier, this compute thing, and I've heard your colleague Kyle Jordan say, like, this compute thing that you had to throw all of these huge servers at this thing was near impossible. It would cost you millions of dollars, right, to do it. And then this whole cloud thing happened, and I think we're finally, not that we didn't see the benefits of it, but I think the benefits are becoming even more aware. Qlik is letting you do these experiments with these heavy compute costs, and we're not actually passing these compute things over to you. Like, we're taking on that onus of the compute costs to let you say, go do it, right? Go experiment, come back, try it again, make some changes, do it again. Whereas I know others are kind of out there charging for it. And I see that as a part of this idea of, as it's driving business value, usually what happens next, people are loving it and they go, how do we scale, right? Can you share kind of what Qlik has done to get ready for scalability within this ML platform?
Yeah, the compute environment is incredibly powerful. And just a couple steps back, in the old world where I used to work, we would have to spend a lot of time the first months of a project putting together that compute cluster for these machine learning projects. And that is no easy task. That requires an enormous amount of engineering, and you essentially have to use cloud environments because they're the only environments that are scalable for these types of compute workloads. And then looking to the experimentation part of it, we fought very hard to have experimentation part of the process with no penalty, because data science and machine learning is iterative by nature. The way it works is it's called science. It starts with a hypothesis. We think we might be able to predict churn based on a couple of different data sets. We think we might be able to predict the customer lifetime value based on some behavioral characteristics, some market data, some cost data. It's hypothesis driven. And then you try things out. You're looking for signal in the data. You don't know if you're going to find something. Oftentimes you don't. Oftentimes you go down a rabbit hole. And what we thought from developing the AutoML capability is we want to be true to the data science process, and not penalize people for experimentation. And so now our customers, and it's one of the things, by the way, I think we're proudest about, is that the people that use the platform, they can go and they can try things and they can experiment without penalty. And as you mentioned, that's on us. We're bearing the compute costs. In terms of the scalability, the wonderful thing is we've got the production environment right there in the cloud. And so deploying it is so easy. I think about some of the hardest things across this whole process. Having again spent so much of my time working with really good data scientists and data engineers. Upstream, it's building the pipelines and the production pipelines to be able to pull in the data and put in the machine learning ready data sets. And then downstream, deploying those into applications that you can actually use. And oftentimes what I'd seen historically is the people that can actually build those applications are not the data scientists. They're a completely different team entirely. And with Qlik, we make it very simple. You can literally just push a button and you can deploy these applications, and you can have the apps in Qlik. Or we have a real-time capability where you just, I think, toggle a button, and we have an endpoint that external systems can hit, because there's a lot of our customers that actually want to access the predictions within an external system.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one of the things I hear from you about kind of where you've been and in Silicon Valley and all that stuff, and I know about you, you now kind of live in the middle of nowhere. So back to a more personal question. What's that been like, from going from this very hyper intensive place of being in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, and then to moving where you are, where I think everything I know we've talked about, everything's a little bit slower, but you still have these interesting conversations with people around the globe. What's that transition been like?
I do. What's wonderful about working in Silicon Valley is you're in the center of the technology universe, and things move so fast from a technology perspective. And that is where so much of the new startups and the innovation happens. The market and the businesses are in the rest of the world. And so there really needs to be a good balance, having one foot in Silicon Valley where you understanding, and I spend a lot of time there still, where you can understand what are the new innovations coming out of the Valley. So much of AI is still headquartered there, and there's so much innovation there. But then the business applications, when I talk to customers in Germany, or I talk to customers in the UK or Spain or even in Singapore, they have a very different perspective of the world. And so the goal is to understand how those technologies can actually help businesses in their daily lives. One of the things that, if you don't have that balance, and this kind of goes back to Silicon Valley, there are a lot of startups and there are a lot of technologies and capabilities, a hammer looking for a nail. They have a really interesting technology, but the question is it even important or useful within the business context? And, that's where I see a lot of the fun part of my job has been historically, is trying to map those two together.
It's so fun to talk to you because I watched you. Didn't you present a seminar at Qlik Connect this last year about what was it, around waves and the effects of weather happening on different
That
things? What
was
was the right?
That was a really fun one. And so the idea was not my own. It's actually, there is an organization in Utah that wanted to understand if they could predict snowfall amounts in the Rocky Mountains of Utah based on wave data or wave signals in Hawaii. And so for Qlik Connect, I recreated that analysis, basically looking at different data sets, different target variables. But that was really fun because part of the impetus for that was, yes, it is true. We are passionate about data, analytics, and AI and how it relates to business. We're a little bit more passionate about snowfall here in the Rocky Mountains.
That's true. That's true. I know earlier this year we were texting back and forth where it was starting to warm here, and you're like, "Yeah, it's just snowed another foot." That's all. That's all I get. We live very different lives, so that's awesome.
I
Well,
believe
listen,
the last text was
guys,
in June. The last text was in June.
which is wild to me. I'm done with it by then. Everything's put away, and you're still texting saying we still had snow. And I was like, when does it become summer there? But I'm sure it's gorgeous right now.
Yeah, it is snowing in the mountains. That's all you need to know.
That's wild. That's wild. Well, Sean, thank you so much for taking some time with me today, sharing a little bit about AutoMel. Anything else that you wanted to say before we sign off?
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, what I love having the conversations with you is really, helping understand what businesses are going through and their unique challenges. And so this has been really fun conversation today.
Yeah, Sean, thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.